Hey, gang, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Biology Online. And we're now going to continue on with our talk of evolution. And since this is science, and in science we do things with evidence, so now we're going to talk about lines of evidence for evolution. And the four big lines of evolution, at least the ones that we're going to cover in this course, are the fossil record. We'll also take a look at embryology, comparative anatomy, and also, we'll look at DNA comparisons, which is going to be a big one because, again, DNA is the blueprint for building a living thing. If this blueprint looks like this blueprint, that when they're both built, they'll look the same. Um, and so that's a good line of evidence for evolution. And so let's just jump straight in. So the first thing is the fossil record. So when we look at the fossil record, first of all, what is the fossil record? Well, the fossil record is simply a collection of specimens, be it animals or plants that we find of once existing life on this planet. A lot of this is extinct and passed and gone away. And some are a lot older than others. And one of the neat things about the fossil record is that wherever you start digging on the fossil record, as you dig down, you're always going to find stuff in the same order. Now, yeah, the first couple of layers may be eroded away, and you may start digging at the Cretaceous or Jurassic. But as you go down, you'll always encounter things in the same order. No one's ever started digging at the Cretaceous, dug down a bunch, and then found the Eocene. No one's ever started digging at the Jurassic and dug down a bunch and found the Pliocene. That's not how things are found. So this gives us a clearer record of things, of life that has occurred on our planet over time. And one of the things that we have learned from studying this is that life started off relatively less complex than it became over time. So as time progressed, living things on the planet became more and more complex. And they're all pretty. There's some resets that happen. There's five big extinctions that occurred. One big extinction occurred at the time of the arthropods, which led to the rise of the reptiles. The rise of the reptiles peaked with the dinosaurs and birds and came to a crashing halt, and that extinction is what led us to the age of mammals and us, essentially. So then it begs the question, when are we going to get our big extinction, right? Because if we follow the fossil record, history repeats itself. So that's one big line of evidence for evolution. So looking at the fossil record, what are some things that it can tell us? Well, one of the things is that let's look at modern day oceanic mammals, the cetaceans, whales and dolphins. All mammals evolved on land, but some of them went back into the water. And how do we know that things that like dolphins and whales, which look like fish to some degree, but they're not, they're mammals. What are some fossils that we found that help us understand where these guys actually came from? Turns out a long time ago, the ancestors of modern-day whales were actually, imagine a goat-like creature the size of a horse, but with a wolf's head. Kind of weird to think of, but that's the ancestor, the land ancestor of all modern-day cetaceans. So one of the lines of evidence that we found is that in modern-day whales and dolphins, here's the Amazonian dolphin. Extant means that it's still living. Extinct means that it would be that their species is dead. But this is extant, still living species, even though there's not many of them left. But the blowhole for these are on top of their head. For most mammals, especially land mammals, it's on the tip of their nose. That's the way you perceive the world. You look over here, your nose is that way. You look over here, your nose is that way. Your eyes, your senses are focused in the direction that you're looking. They're all on the cephalatic region, the head region. So the nose is usually in the front of the face, but in ocean-going mammals, it's on the top of their head. Well, the reason for that is it helps them be able to breathe. Well, if ancient mammals started off with their nostrils in the front, and we are theorizing that modern-day whales and dolphins evolved from land mammals, then the evolutionary theory should tell us, or tells us, that we should find a intermediary species with a nostril that's halfway back. All steps in between, actually, but at least one that's halfway back. And in the fossil record, we do find one about 36 million years ago that actually had a nostril about halfway back. So what happened is that the ancestors of modern day whales started spending a lot more time near the ocean, probably because there's a lot more food that will wash up overnight. It was a lot easier to get that. You didn't have to hunt for it. It would just wash up on the shoreline, most likely already dead. You could eat it kind of like a buffet. And they started spending more time in the water or near the water. And some of the babies, because of variations in the offspring, some of them had noses that were turned up a little bit, maybe a little bit higher, just a little bit, just a small amount. And that allowed them to be more successful when they're in water, having a nose that's a little bit higher in your head, just a little bit, but a little bit higher, a little bit of an advantage, most likely to get what they need to get, be able to reproduce, and pass that trait on to their offspring, at least to some of their offspring. So repeat that process a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit further up, a little bit further up, and it starts seeing the evolution of the whale's nose into their blowhole over millions of years. And we see this clearly in the fossil record. So this is all an artist's renditioning, but I think it's pretty neat to look at. Some of the ancestors of the modern day whale. So you start here, you start going back in time, you'll see that they used to have back legs for standing and walking on land. It's where they started. Over time, they just didn't need it. It became a vestigial organ. Evolution selected against it being there, so it faded out over time, the hind legs. But all modern-day whales, either the baleen whales like the humpback whale or the toothed whales like sperm whales, all of them have hip bones. The whole purpose of a hip bone, think of it structurally in your body. What is the purpose of the hip bone? Well, you've got two legs, and then on top of that, you put a platform, which is your pelvic bone, and then on top of that platform sits your spine. So the whole purpose of your legs is to raise your body, your spine, up off the ground. Why would whales, modern-day whales and dolphins, need a hip bone? Well, they don't. So why do they have it? Well, it's a leftover, it's a remnant of their evolutionary past. It's a remnant of a time when they were once land-going mammals. That all suggests, definitively, pretty much, that whales and dolphins evolved from land-going mammals. How do we know that? The fossil record. Physical, tangible, measurable evidence that we can look at and study and use to theorize and hypothesize about how life on our planet, how it went over the last couple of million years, or billion years, actually. So the next line of evidence is embryology. So if you look at all of these, embryos, which one is the human? All of them are vertebrates, but which one's the human? So let's point out a couple of things. These are gill slits, right? This is a tail. Everything up here has gill slits and a tail. Ta-da! One of these is a human, though. But at the early developmental stages, you really can't tell. All vertebrate embryos are operating on such a basic plan that they all pretty much look the same. As they develop more, you start seeing differences. We can pretty much weed out these first two. This looks like it's a salamander or fish. This looks like some type of salamander. I'm not really sure about the rest of these at this point. They all still look pretty much the same. It's really not until the later points of development that you start seeing the key characteristics that separate the different species from each other. But since they're all vertebrates, they all pretty much look the same at an early developmental stage. What does that suggest? That suggests that there's a lot of relationship between these two. There's an old saying that embryonic development follows your evolutionary past. It's not a good saying. There's a lot of other things that go on with evolutionary development, or embryonic development within the womb that mimics some of the symbols that we see here, but it's not necessarily a direct link between the two. So you'll probably hear that saying again. The saying was embryology follows the evolutionary past. It's not really a good saying. One of the videos that I put up actually covers that. But you may still hear people say that. But still, it begs to reason that at the early developmental stages, we all pretty much are functioning on the same basic plan, suggesting that we're all related to each other. So we have a fish, a salamander, a tortoise, a chicken, a pig, a rabbit, and a human. And yeah, so embryology, another line of evidence for evolution. Here's another example, pointing out some major features: gill slits, tails, fish, reptile, bird, and human. Um, all of these are all vertebrates, so they all share these features. When you were in your mother's womb, you had gill slits in a tail. At a certain developmental point, enzymes were kicked in that broke them back down, so you got rid of your gill slits, you got rid of your postanal tail. You still have a little bit of one, everyone has it. The bottom of your sacrum, your tailbone, is a thing called a coccyx, which is literally 3 to 5 pieces of vertebra that extend past the sacrum, which is the vestigial remains of your ancestral tail. I know, right? Some people are born with that still intact. Some people are born with tails. And most people just have them cut off, same as having 6 digits on your fingers. A lot of people are born with 6 digits. It's actually a dominant trait over having 5. We just don't see that often in the population, mostly because of sexual selection. But that vestigial organ in the tail, most of them just have it cut off, right? Surgically removed. If you're born in the 1400s and you had a tail, what happened to you then? Well, you're probably killed because obviously your mom had sex with a demon and she's going to get killed too because the baby was born with the tail. We know better than that now. You know, it wasn't called the Dark Ages because there wasn't a lot of light. It was called the Dark Ages because people weren't very intelligent, superstition and the sword ruled. So, you know, things were a lot different back then. But, you know, so far we've covered 2 big lines of evidence for evolution: fossil record and embryological development.